I'm not gonna lie, if there's a show I had to point out and say what is my most anticipated anime coming out this season, it was probably the second season of Promised Neverland. The first season I had a decent amount of knowledge, despite reading most of the content that was adapted in season 1, since I read it when it was releasing week by week. Entering last season, I was pretty fuzzy, so it was kind of a mixture of feeling like I was a new time watcher, but also having some moments of deja vu. This season, I have no knowledge. I obviously heard manga readers say mixed things. Some really like this new arc, some saying it's lackluster. But I have to say, this is amazing from what I just saw. One of the things I've always loved about Promised Neverland was its horror aesthetic, and I said it doesn't matter if this remains to be a super frightening show or if it does something completely different. I'm going to judge each arc as its own story, but the idea of going from being cattle raised on a farm to be fed off to monsters, to then starting the episode off with our characters, you would think, oh, they're free, they escaped the cattle farm, they're free, and you just see them running for their life, playing a game of tag as a giant monster in a dimly lit forest is chasing after them, ready to eat. You go from hungry mouths kind of raising you and pampering you, to a hungry mouth wanting to just rip you apart and give you no breakfast before it happens. I think this episode really just took what season 1 did, ran with it, while adding in some new spices. I mean, you end the episode with seemingly 2 characters who save our kids who are monsters. And I think, depending on the direction they take this story, if they actually make them wanting to help humans, this could be a very interesting turning point that will shake the foundation of what's to come in the Promised Neverland story, and honestly, the sky's the limit. One thing, if you go back to any of my reviews, whether it's the full review or the episodics that I did for season 1, I've constantly complimented the lighting in this show, and it's one of the things that elevates something from a manga to an anime. The anime medium has a lot to work with that things like manga doesn't. The one thing manga will have over anime is it generally has more time to flesh things out, and not have to condense it. Where with anime, you have voice acting, you have sound effects, you have animation, lighting, all these extra elements that can compensate for a lack of speech bubbles that couldn't have been adapted, but you could give a subtle clue that gives the same feeling. That's what you can do in the anime, and this episode had some of the best horror lighting I have seen. The moment where Ray is running and he throws the lamp when the monster's coming after him, beautiful shot. It's so hard to focus, you're like, what's going on? But every time you get a glimpse of what's chasing him, you're ready to shit your pants alongside this character who's been sprinting for his life this entire time. All the moments of glowing optimism, like the green lights that kind of shone in at certain points, or the just shadows creeping around, this was a terrifying episode, and I think rather than going with what I thought was going to happen, they would be walking, I thought it was going to be a very slow episode where not a lot of action-pumping things would happen, but rather it would be, okay, we've escaped from one location and now we're traveling to the other. We got this pen with a map, we're deciphering what's going on here. I'm fine with that. Actually, in all honesty, like any sort of like apocalyptic show or game where you have to abandon where was safe and have to try to find somewhere that's even more safe as you're pretty much starving, you have no water, you have no food, you have to survive like you've never had anything before. I love that type of content, so I was walking into this season ready for that. So to have an episode that has that, but then immediately is throwing them into shitty situations, not only just having the nature that they've never seen before trying to consume them, they also have to worry about pursuers. And personally, I thought the pursuers weren't going to be an issue this episode. Eventually, yes. But I thought based on what was happening, I thought with Ray not wanting to immediately go to the river, which would be the most obvious choice for kids needing water and food to survive, I thought it was going to be maybe a couple of episodes, if maybe even half the season, before they would catch up to them. Not because they made it so far, but rather it's a pretty big wide world and they're pretty smart, so there's a good shot that they could find a place that they wouldn't know and they would be able to survive without seeing them for quite a bit of time. So to have this episode immediately have them catch up is not only realistic and makes sense because, well, they couldn't have escaped too far, and word of mouth would have spread rather quick of what happened. So the idea of them actually going after Ray lying, saying, hey, you know, they're all dead, which does make sense, but of course, obviously, you're not going to believe the guy who got away. You're going to basically assume that he was probably lying for the kid's sake. It's a very interesting dynamic that they're able to lay out in this episode to get you feeling like there's hope, but just because they jumped over that wall and were able to escape to seemingly freedom, it's not going to be an easy ride, and this world is much bigger than we initially realized. And I think the idea of having the world be bigger than any of the kids or even the viewer realize is something that they did really well with one of the first shots you see, which is giant trees, which doesn't seem like much, but the visual directing and symbolism of kids who saw trees, saw a lot of beautiful things in their cattle farm, are now seeing that the world is much bigger and scarier than they ever realized. While they are free, that freedom, it may be beautiful, but it's also cruel. So what are they going to do with what they've just experienced? This arc, I think, has a lot of potential, and while it has been confirmed to only be an 11-episode season, I personally think, depending on, I can't speak for the sources here, how many episodes it needs for this arc. I mean, with the world we live in and how unstable anime production can be, I would much rather 11 quality episodes than 24 mediocre episodes, because most Q-cores that are going to be made in the coming years are probably going to suffer from a lot of production issues. So I'd much prefer waiting for a season 3 for another 12 or 11 episodes within a year or two, rather than having a mediocre production. And based on the quality that we saw with episode 1, it had me exhilarated. It was just as frightening as some of the most shocking moments in the first season, and I think even more so depending on how you look at it, with a bunch of kids trying to survive, running for their life, having no chance at breathing, and by the time you do get saved, you're wondering, are these people friend or foe? And then Ray drops the bombshell that they're basically demons, that they're these monsters, and you're like, well, I'm still 50-50 on where this could go. The ending would make you seem like they're probably on the good side. It was a very nice, peaceful ending, which I really dug, but I have to say the opening was surprisingly bouncy, which is interesting because visually the opening is terrifying, it's horrifying, but the opening song, it feels very optimistic, so it's an interesting contrast of having visually horrifying imagery, but the song makes it feel like things could be okay. So I think what this episode did was it just made it a coin flip, not knowing how good or bad their situation truly is, while setting up some pretty interesting mystery with this whole map and kind of trying to locate Minerva, while also having these new friends or foes depending on what's going to happen. I would say friend because, I mean, granted, they are monsters, maybe they want them to be, demonic food that's A+, perfectly fine, but I feel like they're probably on the good side, but then again, only time can tell. And just so everyone knows, while this episode did come out on a Wednesday, the episodes will be coming out on Thursdays. This was just one of those things that the episode released early, where it was just one of those things that, unlike where in Japan you get these episodes dropping early on Netflix and the West has to wait, this time, Hulu has this show, I watched it on Funimation. So this will be a Thursday show, but I mean, it was a pretty great surprise to wake up seeing that it was already out, because this is my personal most anticipated. I'm not going to say it's going to be my favorite anime of the season, but it's one of the things that just has me the most excited, and this episode definitely delivered tenfold for me, and I hope a lot of people will enjoy it as well, and hopefully manga readers will not spoil as much as they have been on places like Reddit and Twitter, because, it has been pretty bad, I've seen for some people, so fingers crossed we'll be okay over here. I'd be interested to hear, what did everyone think of the return of Promised Neverland Episode 1 or Episode 13, depending on how you're keeping track? Did you like it as much myself, or did you find it to be a bit of a letdown? Let me know down below. If you enjoyed the video, of course, if you like, share, your support, and hit that subscribe button if you have been new around here. So until next time, everyone, please take care and have a good one.